First off, Jim, I'm going to turn to you and ask you, is there an asset bubble in China, and what's the best proof that you found of an asset bubble?
Well, I think there's thanks for having me, Kathy, and I think this is going to be a lot of fun. I think that there is a fixed asset bubble occurring in China, specifically in construction, and specifically in construction of Class A office space and high-rise condominiums, where we see most of the fixed asset construction occurring, not only in the Tier 1 cities that everyone knows on the coast, but working inland as well. And, I mean, the signs, whether quantitative through the GDP accounts, as much as we can put faith in them using the official numbers, or qualitatively and anecdotally, are legion. They're everywhere. And there's no doubt, I think, that it's occurring if you look at the numbers and you look at actually what's happening. The interesting thing about a fixed asset bubble is that it's tangible. You can see it. The question is, how do you get away from the, as I called it, the heroin of a fixed asset construction and its immediate aspects of GDP growth that it brings on?
And anecdotally, what's the things that you've seen that really make you think that there's a huge bubble?
Well, I mean, there have been amazingly good press accounts in the last couple of months as the Western press has sort of woken up to this too. I mean, whether it's regional cities that have an airport with one flight, brand new flight coming in, whether you look at the high-speed rail construction that the country will grow into, but right now makes no sense on a per-kilometer cost basis. It may in 10 or 20 years. Whether you see certain towns, knocking down pieces of infrastructure, bridges and highways to put up new ones. Meanwhile, they were constructed 5 years ago. I mean, we can go on and on and on. I mean, everyone has their stories.
And Steve, do you see an asset bubble in China?
Look, there's sharp increases in residential property prices in a number of leading cities in China. But, it pains me to take on Jim, who I have so much respect for.
Please do.
You ignorant slut. But
I've been called worse.
But, Jim, this is a country that has rural-urban migration of 15 to 20 million people a year. So that's like, 2 New York cities a year spring up in China. There are definitely cases where supply outstrips demand. I remember going to Shanghai in the mid-'90s and watching this massive, Dubai-like urban development effort spring up in Pudong, and it was empty for years, and now it's full. So I think, in a developing economy, the supply-demand imbalance, especially in a place like China where there's not just a lot of people, but a huge shift in the character of the population, I think you've got to be careful in looking at supply-demand the way we do in a place like Houston or some of the other places where we know we've had see-throughs, in certain periods in time. So, and I think, I'm not denying there's not a bubble, and China certainly has had more than its fair share of bubbles over the years. But they're in the process of popping this one right now through very aggressive measures, and I think the best thing you can say about the Chinese and the way they deal with bubbles is they're a lot smarter than we are in the U.S. I mean, we let them blow up our economy. They let them blow up, and they blow up the speculators. But the economy keeps plugging along, and I think that'll be the case this time as well.
Well, I have no problem with them blowing up the speculators, Steve. That's okay. But because the Western speculators tend to get blown up even worse. But I want to go back to your first point, because one of the things that is so interesting to us is that in the residential side, and to a lesser extent the office side, that which they're building is not for the people who are in-migrating. They can't afford it. If you take a look at China's official statistics, China will tell you, and again, we're going to use their official statistics, half of the country already is registered and lives in urban areas, 650 million, give or take, of the 1.3 billion.
I know most of it.
The problem is, of the remaining 650, there's a good, depending on who you want to talk to and what you read, there's as many as 200 to 250 to maybe as many 300 million migrant workers that are actually already living in the urban areas, but are registered in the rural areas. If that's the case, then you only have 300 left in the rural areas. That 15, 20 million that keep migrating is going to leave nobody to tend the farms in 10 years, if that's true. And the population isn't growing as a whole, as you know. It's not, the country is not growing its population in total.
Look, I don't want to get into a fight over Chinese numbers, but I think the rural population is an awful lot larger than the, what'd you say, 300 million left? I think it's a lot larger than that. I really
well, I think it's going to get larger, too, because a lot of the migrant workers that are in the city are working in construction. So you actually could have migration going back the other way, if I'm right.
Yeah, well, I think they're going to be building for a long, long time. I mean, I see it as I spend, the bulk of my Asia time in China, and I'm not saying that capital is allocated rationally by a state-directed banking system, and you're entirely right to say that, they put this huge stimulus package in place to fight the crisis. They needed to do it. You talk about shovel-ready projects. I mean, every Chinese worker goes around with a shovel. They're ready. I mean, it takes us, 18 months to get a permit to own a shovel in America. But they did it quickly, and they did a lot of aggressive bank lending to fund it. I know you've pointed that out, and you're worried about the local government debt, and there's a lot of people that are overwrought about that as well, including, by the way, the Chinese Banking and Regulatory Commission, who's right now doing very special examinations of the loans at the local government level, and I guarantee you they're going to be write-offs, NPLs, if not this summer, by the fall, the banks will have to take a hit because of it. But this is not the end of the world. The China growth story is not, a fantasy story. It's a developing economy. They drive an awful lot of their growth through the supply side. They screw it up from time to time. The big story in China, though, I think, is that they're going to migrate away from the supply side to the demand side and stimulate internal private consumption. And that's an even more exciting and, I think, ultimately a more sustainable story for China.
But that hasn't happened yet.
No.
Consumption as a percent of GDP has stayed constant for the last 5 years.
It's as low as I've ever seen for any economy in the world. So the growth drivers of China have been exports and
exports have dropped
fixed investment.
Exports have dropped as a percent of the economy over the past 5 years. Net exports.
No, wrong. I will challenge you on that. Don't take. You can't take your numbers out.
I can't take my numbers out. Well, they've dropped since 2006. They've gone. They're now 4% of the economy. I believe they were about 7 or 8% in 2006.
They did. They went from 2.5% in the year 2000 to 7.5% in 2006. They've fallen back cyclically, but the export sector itself.
So then you're not challenging my numbers, right?
They're up. They're up a lot since the beginning of. But here's the point. For 30 years, this has been an export and an investment story. It's been extremely powerful. You add those two sectors up, they've doubled as a share of GDP over 30 years. And now that model is being challenged because of an external demand shock, because of consumption in the West, and because the investment sector, as you correctly point out, is toppy. So China's got a couple of choices. They let the economy slow a lot, and that creates a lot of high unemployment, which is unacceptable to them. Or they go for the sector they've left behind, which is internal private consumption. And I'm absolutely confident that's what they're going to do. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's going to be a lot quicker than people think.
And how are they going to do that?
Kathy, they operate on the basis of these 5-year plans. So the next 5-year plan takes effect early next year, they're going to do three things. They're going to really aggressively fund the social safety net, Social Security, private pensions, medical insurance, unemployment insurance to reduce excess saving. They're going to focus on new sources of job creation by stimulating large-scale, labor-intensive services. And thirdly, they're really going to provide a lot of special incentives to rural Chinese families. The official Chinese estimate, Jim, of the rural population is 800 million, which is a lot larger than you said. But whether it's 800 million or, what'd you say, 300 million, soon to be 500 million because of the reverse migration, these people are lagging in the way of income. And if they do those three things, they'll move the needle. The consumption share of GDP, which is 35 over this 5-year planning horizon, could go up, into the mid-40s.
And Jim, do you see a problem with this plan? Do you think they'll be able to do that?
Well, I find it the ultimate irony in Western financial markets that investors who completely abhor government involvement by and large into the markets or the free markets seem to totally embrace the ability of 9 guys in a room, as I call it, to keep coming up with 5-year plans that always work, where you have an absence of price mechanism and all sorts of classic economic theory that goes out the window, and that somehow all this malinvestment, to use a Minsky term, is going to turn out just okay because it's China. And I think that bad decisions are bad decisions, no matter what market they're in or what political economic philosophy you espouse. And I think they're going to have a hard time making that easy transition because a command economy, as you point out, is much easier to mobilize state-controlled and state-owned resources for production or for investment than it is to get the rural consumer to decide they need to buy a second television. And I think that's going to be a tougher, that's much more, the free market does a much better job at that. And from my opinion, make no mistake, China does not have a free market. It has the trappings of a free market.
Well, we saw what the free market did to the binge-buying American consumer, right? I mean, do we really, is that, the model that we want the Chinese consumers to aspire to, where you lever your home and take your personal savings rate down to zero and take your debt ratios up to here?
Well, no one's ever going to accuse me of being a glass half full kind of guy for the U.S. economy, but I'll wave the flag a little bit. I think the U.S. economy has done a pretty good job in allocating resources over the past 100 years, and there's no better place still to innovate and start businesses than in the U.S., not China. And that if you talk to I think George Bush is in the audience. But I think that
it says Mike Bloomberg.
If you look at for example, Apple's iPod, which is manufactured in China, a very, very tiny fraction of the total value added of that iPod goes to China for manufacturing. Most of the value added is in the innovation, the software, the marketing, the apps, all the rest of that stuff that make it a great product. That does not accrue to China. And I'm concerned that without rule of law, without trademark enforcements, without all kinds of Western trappings, that it'd be very, very hard for entrepreneurs to say, I'm going to base my company, not manufacturing, but base my company with all my software engineers, with all the intellectual property I have, and put it in China. And at the end of the day, that's still where the 21st century is going to go, I think.